Welcome to the third webinar in the series of Global Goodness. Today we're going to talk about values of foreign policy. I think the foreign policy is definitely the test of global shared values. We can talk all we want about solving wicked problems together, but our actual values are shown in the realm of foreign policy. My name is Maija-Riitta Orjola, and I'm thrilled to introduce our distinguished speakers. It is a great honor for the University of Turku and Turku School of Economics to welcome Minister for Foreign Affairs, Pekka Haavisto. You're very welcome. Nowadays, it's not possible to discuss foreign policy without discussing China. We are privileged to have with us the Senior Research Fellow at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, now 60 years old institute, and docent in international relations and Chinese studies from the University of Lapland. Yrki Kallio, it's great to have you with us. Welcome. Niina Nummela is Professor of International Business and Vice Dean at Turku School of Economics. Some of her many research interests are especially relevant from our point of view today, such as cosmopolitan individuals, entrepreneurial internationalization, and ethical challenges in international business. Welcome, Niina Nummela. Well, in the eyes of an outsider, being a Minister for Foreign Affairs seems to be a mission impossible. Foreign policy is linked to so many other areas like security policy, the economy, international law, technological change. There are traditional military and security threats and cyber and hybrid threats as well. I would like to start with a personal question, if I may. Pekka Haavisto, what motivates you to continue in this office from day to day tirelessly?
Well, it's thank you, Maija-Liisa and Maija-Riitta, and great to be with you and colleagues here online. Well, of course, I have been always interested on foreign policy issues, and I still think that there is possible to work according to your values. Actually, the first choice that you have to always make, do you communicate or you do not communicate? This sounds strange, but we have even among European Union foreign ministers, people who said we don't communicate with this country X, Y, Z because we don't have anything in common. And I'm, for example, told my colleagues that I have been recently in contact with the Belarus foreign minister, Vladimir Makey, and everybody looked shocked that, why do you talk to Belarus? I said, well, I think this is exactly the moment when you have to talk with them. You might find out that you don't have common values but and common opinions and common views, but it's very important to check also if there is some opening towards the future. You might disagree on the past, you might disagree on the present, but you might find something where you are in common in the future. If I take this very recent example of Belarus, actually one of my sentences was, you have been always, since your independence, balancing between the East and West, between Russia and European Union interest, and you have been very skillful actually on that. Now you have only one number to call, which is now in Moscow in this occasion. Is this your optimum situation? Is this where you want things to be also in the future, or do you have some other goals? And actually this was a very interesting discussion because it is obvious that this is not an ideal situation even for Belarus. And if you as a foreign minister and through the dialogue can intervene or have some input to this kind of debates, it's very, very important. Back to you.
So obviously communicating is something that you're talented at and that motivates you. Coming from the southwestern part of Finland and being an introvert, I quite admire that. But in the youth of my generation, there was this constant talk about realpolitik in German terms. In Finland, it was closely related to geopolitics. And realism in foreign policy has been counterbalanced by political idealism. Do you think these concepts are still relevant, or are they part of an outdated approach?
Well, I think among the different schools of the foreign politics, the value-based and the geopolitical certainly are somehow opposite groupings and opposite schools, and I think it's interesting to play with these words at least. And when you speak about value-based foreign policy, you find your friends there where people have shared values, and geographically they can be on other continents, they can be wherever, they can be big or small. The size doesn't matter. It's about the common values. And nowadays, for example, you find similar values more and more from some African countries, from some Asian countries, for example, democracy, human rights issues, equality issues, role of women, which are important for Finland, it's all over the globe, of course, where you find your so to say, ideological relatives and so forth. If you take the geopolitical approach, you start to look the map, and you say, you look, aha, here's a superpower next to you. Aha, how do you find a counterbalance to the superpower, or do you have to ally with that, and so forth? And you are more dealing with your immediate neighbors, despite do you share the values with them or not. And I think this is the geopolitics is somehow an old-fashioned also when you think about the hybrid world and the cyberspace and all these issues, because the information is floating so rapidly. You can find the people who think in a similar way from whichever geological location and all over the globe. Of course, geology still matters, but not maybe as much as it was before.
It's very encouraging to hear that you actually see these shared values in different parts of the world. But are there any particular challenges for this value-based foreign policy?
Well, there are many challenges, and of course, one of the issues is that you have to deal, of course, with also with those with whom you don't share the values. When I was in February meeting with Foreign Minister Lavrov in St. Petersburg and so forth, there was maybe majority of the issues where we disagreed, and it's our important neighbor. We have to find ways to cooperate, and despite of those differences, we have to, of course, live our everyday life together. It's our immediate neighbor. But maybe if I take one example from those issues where I've been part of the peace talks, and I very well remember some people representing, I would say, true political Islam values, and people who are on the extreme side of Islam. And I always remember when I have been using our experience, and I said, well, we had a very bitter Second World War. We lost part of our country, Karelia. 500,000 people went as refugees to Finland, internal displaced persons, and still we live in peace with our neighbor. So you should take here in Somalia, let's say so, a model from us. And then this gentleman who was really deep in his Islamic values said, and you are covered persons, you just gave part of your country away. What is this, Before we solve the problems of Somalia, we have to come to solve the problems in Finland. You have lost your important city, Viborg, and so forth. And then I said, sorry, I didn't mean that we come to make a revenge. But it was extremely interesting that this kind of issues, even from the history, can trigger many kinds of stories. For us, it's a real good experience how we manage a most difficult situation. But for some other, it might be a an insult that we somehow have been swallowing, and we should not have done that. And I said, well, then we would continue the war still for today. And then my counterpart said, yes, but you have to keep your values. So this is there might be challenges.
Great examples. I clearly recall the day when I was sitting at the TV set, like many Europeans, watching your conversation with Lavrov. And I totally identified with the job of the Minister for Foreign Affairs for once in my life. And I was so proud, but let's proceed. If all nations had shared interests, we might build shared values on those interests. That's one way of looking at values. Because values are, after all, goals of action on a very general level. And I think you already outlined, but I would still like to specify your point of view. Do those kind of interests exist between nations?
Well, I think the common interest exists, and sometimes people wake up to their interest a little bit later, and sometimes earlier, and so forth. But I was just in Arctic Council in Reykjavik in Iceland, and we discussed again the climate issue. Now US has changed totally their climate policy since Trump period, and they want to do also preventing the climate change on the Arctic areas. This is great. But at the same time, in Russia, totally for other reasons, their infrastructure in northern areas, in Arctic areas, has been collapsing due to the melting of the permafrost. Their oil industry is suffering, their gas industry is suffering. And suddenly Russia is very interested how to prevent the climate change, to protect their infrastructure in the Arctic areas. And then you can see that, hey, now the bits and pieces are coming together in a right way. You have both superpowers from this region interested on similar issues, maybe for different reasons, but they are sharing the picture, what could be the worst case scenario for their countries. And I think there is possibility for finding these common values and common action in these kind of cases.
That's great. But let's think about other areas of sustainable development besides climate change. Do you see relations between foreign policy and these sustainability goals in some other respects?
Well, there is, of course, when you speak about the sustainability, there is always the environmental, the economic and social components of that. And of course, it's always a little bit swing who is talking about which sustainability. Is it, if you say, economic sustainable way and so forth, you might talk totally about other values than what is the environmental sustainability. But of course, what has happened with the SDGs and these common goals, the UN goals, I think it has been extremely positive. And I think they represent quite well those 17 goals very well, where the humankind is going and where it should go. And I have even seen here in Finland, some youth who have problems. Tutor has been put these sustainable development goals in front of the young person and say, hey, now let's look your life, how you are fulfilling these 17 criteria. And it can be even used on the personal level. But I think it's been a great effort to somehow, I would say, harmonize at least part of our values and part of our goals on the UN level. It's very important work.
Thank you. What about foreign policy in the digital era? Has it changed in any fundamental way, or what's going on?
Well, there are phenomena. Of course, we can see what's happening in Kenya elections when local people in local villages are sending camera photos or small films and are the elections fair and what's happening and so forth. Or we see the phenomena like the Bellingcat, who has been investigating different international incidents and so forth, and joining the force, this kind of citizen journalism that is coming. and so forth. But of course, the digital age gives us also a lot of, unfortunately, a lot of new possibilities for hate speech, for disinformation, and all this. And we see, for example, around the COVID-19, both information and disinformation competing, and this is maybe a surprise, at least for us politicians, how popular this disinformation can be in your own country and globally, and it's really competing with the real information at the moment.
You have a long experience of demanding negotiations to ensure peaceful development in a conflict situation. Now, global ethics is also a kind of negotiation process. We can't dictate values to others. So what would you say, what are the critical issues in the negotiations when it comes to agreeing on and implementing common goals?
Well, one issue, it's the same as at the kitchen table, and that's listening. When in peace negotiations, people want to repeat their story. They want to repeat why they have come to this position, why they have maybe taken arms, why they have attacked, and so forth. And very easily, because you feel that I have heard this 100 times, you very easily say that I have heard this so many times, go now ahead, and so forth. And then people are maybe reacting negatively to that. And I have learned that in the end, if you are seeking for compromises, people first say where they have always been standing, what has always been their principles. And then in the last sentence, they might say, but this time I may be ready to make a compromise, and so forth. So you have to listen. You have to, however painful it is, to listen, maybe same stories again and again. That's one thing. And second thing is maybe this kind of personal respect. People might be terrorists, they might be they might have done genocides and so, but at that moment when they are at the table, you cannot show that disrespect or anything like that. It's anyhow an individual who tries to cope with the situation, and you have to try to understand this position. And I think this respect is very important. I am again, for example, in Somalia peace process, I have met people who finally rejected to come to the peace table, and because they said that they were not sure if they will be treated in dignity. And this dignity is all human beings, extremely, extremely important. And I think that's one of the key words. Back to you.
That's what we talk about during the global business ethics course, respect. Maybe loving is a little bit too much, but respect you can do. It's something that you can exercise your will and actually respect the dignity of other people. And I'm so happy that this will be available to students. They will learn about your ideas next fall. And also everybody else who is interested will be having access to this material on the web page. Thank you so much. Jyrki Kallio, you're not only a researcher, but also a writer. You have translated with excellent commentaries the philosophy of Confucius and Mencius, for example, and this work has no doubt required extensive and in-depth language studies. Classical Chinese may not be the most accessible language. Why you find it important to combine studies of classical Chinese with your research on contemporary Chinese politics?
Well, this is a question I hear quite often, and it's a good question. And it's there are basically two reasons for that. The first one is that for the last 2 or 3 decades in China, there's been a clear rise in interest towards Chinese tradition. One can even talk of sort of a renaissance of traditional Chinese thought in China, which started to take place when communism as an ideology was losing ground, and the Communist Party was no longer that or reacted that strongly against tradition, but started to see that tradition had some value in itself. So this renaissance of tradition can be seen in the grassroots level, but it's also reflected in the upper levels and in the halls of power. And we can, to an extent, also ask the question, to what extent is this renaissance a grassroots phenomenon, and to what extent is it actually led by the party leaders? Because the party leaders, in particular, Xi Jinping and his predecessor, Hu Jintao, were often quoting Chinese texts. But so did already Deng Xiaoping and Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong was actually more read in classics, Chinese classics, than in Marxist texts. During the era of Hu Jintao and now Xi Jinping, there's been a clear attempt of bringing some of these classical concepts up to the forefront again and making them part of the Chinese language when they discuss society, politics, even foreign relations. And there are certain classical concepts that are repeated all over again and again. And I really believe that it is necessary to go to the roots, to read about those concepts and how they came about, using the original texts that where they can be seen. So that is in classical literary Chinese, in order to really understand what is the background of these concepts, how are they used, how are they utilized, how are they instrumentalized, and it's very often when if one had to relate or rely on just translations, that many nuances and important details would be lost.
That's interesting. You mentioned the predominance of certain classical concepts in Chinese political thinking. What are they? And what should we know about the ancient Chinese philosophy to understand the present way of thinking in China?
These are huge questions. I could give a long lecture about it, but perhaps I try to be as brief as I can. There are some concepts that are more important than others today. One of them is unity and the ideal of unity. Now, of course, unity is just the word we have that as well, but in China, it has a special connotation. Unity has always been the most important criteria for the ruler's legitimacy. So if the empire was not unified, then it was a sign that the ruler no longer has legitimacy. And this idea goes back at least 2 millennia, and it has been very, very predominant in Chinese political thinking. But unity also entails well-being for the population, because it is understood already in the very, very early texts that it's only in a unified empire, which means that when there is no civil war going on. China, of course, in the early days was thrived by civil war. It was like the Greek city-states warring with each other all the time. So only during peacetime, only during unity, can there be well-being for the population. Then there's a concept that sounds a bit strange. It can be translated as the kingly way, Wang Dao, which is a Chinese way of saying that China has always followed the king's way instead of the hegemon's way. The king's way serves as an opposite to the way of the hegemon, which means that a king, a true king, gets his subjects to respect and love him through his virtue, not by force. And by extension, this virtue can also make any rulers around this king to realize that this particular king is really the one that is fit to rule everything under the heaven. And under the heaven is another tianxia, is another Chinese concept that comes forth all the time. It also loses in translation. It's usually translated as the world, but it really means all under heaven. And in different contexts, different situations, it can be interpreted either as the empire, or us versus the others, or the known world. So it all depends on the context. And this idea of the Tianxia, everything under the heaven, is also related to the ideal or the thinking that is also very strong in the early Chinese texts that was later then by Chairman Mao Zedong. He made a relation with this ideal with the communist utopia, which is the commonwealth, the great commonwealth of humanity, meaning that there will be a time in the future where the whole humanity will be coming together. This is an idea that the Chinese politicians still today often talk about. There are others, of course, but these are perhaps the most relevant, especially when we're thinking about today's theme.
They sound rather poetic. Things under heaven and the king's way. How are these values and concepts that you mentioned reflected in China's current line of foreign policy?
Well, first of all, there is a strong message that Chinese leadership wants to send out to the world, is that in their understanding, there are no such things as universal values. China has its own tradition and own history, and has the right to build its own thinking on the basis of that tradition and that history. And this is related to Xi Jinping's great ideal, the China Dream, which stands for the great rejuvenation of the Chinese people, which means that China should get rid of, as the Chinese sort of historical or the Communist Party's idea or teaching of history is such that China has been humiliated by imperial powers, colonial powers, and today those countries that try to prevent China from rising are continuing that same trend. So China needs to rejuvenate, needs to rise again. So it's a bit Trumpian idea, of course, that make China great again. And here unity comes into play again, because sovereignty and territorial unity, territorial integrity are China's core interests, and they of course reflect the fact that China is or is not united. And this is why, for instance, why the questions related to the border regions such as Xinjiang and Tibet are so touchy for the Chinese leadership, or why the Taiwan issue, Taiwan being a separate government from the People's Republic, is something that the Communist Party leadership just has to solve in order to be able to say that they deserve the legitimacy for their leadership. And now under Xi Jinping, China has rather successfully, actually, even in several United Nations documents, promoted the idea of something that they translate as the common destiny of humankind, which is really putting the great commonwealth of the humanity in modern terms. And this is something that China has been sort of making their new foreign policy keyword, that they want to include this word in the language of international relations. And that is related to this unhegemonic idea, this kingly way idea of China, that China traditionally, according to the historiography of the Communist Party, has never approved of hegemony or has never aimed at hegemony. It does not want to seek hegemony itself. And this is then the idea also that is reflected behind China's, what they call the new kind of great power relations.
We really have to learn about the old Chinese philosophy. I clearly see that now. Pekka Haavisto emphasized the role of good communication. And now that we want to have dialogue with China, given our Finnish perspective, what challenges and potentials should we consider?
Those are very good words, challenges and potentials, because there certainly are both. Now, I think on the short term, right now, I think it is important that we realize that right now the Communist Party of China is going through a particularly sensitive era with regard to the challenges. This year, they are celebrating the 100th anniversary of the establishment of the party. This is very important for the Communist Party because they have been afraid of the destiny of the Soviet Union and the Communist Party of Soviet Union all along. And now they can say, look, we have survived for 100 years. That risk is no longer with us. We have outlived everybody else in the world. We are the longest living Communist Party in the world. And this is very important. It's very important that China can go through these celebrations without any sort of problems. And certainly the COVID-19 pandemic has been a very bad blow to China with that regard, because China was also supposed to celebrate getting rid of poverty this year, reaching new height in its economic growth, and of course all these economic goal settings it has been necessary to alter them. The next year is a Communist Party Party Congress, where Xi Jinping is supposedly going to be given continuation as the party leader, which goes against the system that has been in place for the last two Communist Party leaders. But this is and there is opposition to this within the Communist Party. The Communist Party in China is not a monolith. So that's also something that makes the whole situation right now in China very, very volatile, and there's a lot of tension within the party. But it is my hope that within a couple of years, when these, when we are over, when we are past these tricky moments, then the tension will ease, and perhaps China will go sort of back to normal with that regard. Now that said, I think it's important to understand this at this very moment, the particular sensitivities in China. But at the same time, I think it would be good to challenge China to stay true to their slogans. If they talk about the great commonwealth, the common destiny of humankind, then we should really insist and demand that they do exactly that, especially in putting more effort in tackling the climate crisis. That is something that certainly is something that combines the humanity together. And then lastly, I would say that while China is talking about these, its own value base and its own tradition, and talking against the existence of universal values, we should remain staunch in defending universality of values. And while we do that, we can be sure that there are many scholars and people in China who also quite convincingly and academically can state that the Chinese values are actually not so dissimilar with the values of the rest of the humankind. And just one simple example of that is the idea that many Chinese political leaders and also many people in the West, sort of the sometimes I'd like to call them useful fools of China, who try to say that, look at China, they are a collective society. They're a society where the individual is not at the center, and that's why things are so much better and so forth. That is not true. In the light of Chinese tradition, individual has also been there at the very center of development and Confucian ideology.
Thank you very much. We'll definitely cling to the common destiny of humankind. The whole idea of global ethics rests on that ground. I'm quite optimistic now compared to the 1 hour before. Your view on China is very encouraging. Thank you. Nina Nummela, you're an extraordinarily bright and optimistic person. However, you have ended up teaching a course on the new challenges of global business, which essentially addresses the dark side of international business. The situation reminds me of Star Wars. How does a perfectly virtuous person end up on the dark side?
Well, thank you, Maija-Riitta, for your kind words. I do normally think that my glass of life is half full instead of half empty. But I also happen to think that when we look at business education, it is very much suffering from a sort of a success bias in a way. We tell the students about success stories and how to make it in the global business and so on, but actually much less about failures and the negative aspects of global business. The course which you mentioned, that has its roots, I think, maybe already a decade ago, when I had a discussion with a former student of ours. I was asking about how she felt about her studies at the Turku School of Economics, and she mentioned that it would be a good idea perhaps to have a course which would deal on topical issues. And we drafted a course which was planned to have changing themes. And for the time being, the course is focusing on negative implications of international business, the dark side of it. And the idea is that the course focuses on the illegitimate actions in global business. And so the students would be familiar with them after completing the course, so that they could be also preparing for the challenges, related challenges. Illegitimate actions in this case would mean, for example, violation of human rights, money laundering, corruption, human trafficking, modern slavery, and the kind of themes. The idea of that course is actually that we think that the only thing we can be sure of is that the future is uncertain. So the students who are studying today, by the time they enter the labor market, the world can be completely different. We've seen that during the past years. And if that is the case, the only thing we can say is to prepare them for this kind of turbulence and upheaval. And the mission of Turku School of Economics says that we educate responsible future leaders. And it means that we hope that they are visionary and that they are transformative leaders. And this would mean that they not only, try to predict what is going to happen next and plan accordingly, or just adjust and adapt to the changing environment, but they would actually look ahead and think what kind of future they would like to have. Then they would have to take the resources they have and then try to co-create the future they want. So this is what we would like them to have.
Great. Now, you already mentioned some of those ethical problems that are hidden in international business. Would you like to elaborate a little bit?
Well, there would be a much bigger list, of course, of all kind of challenges of global business and also ethical problems. We have decided to focus on these issues, because this kind of macro level issues, because these are the kind of or micro level issues, because when it comes to these challenges, it is actually an individual decision. You can decide to be a responsible future leader. You can decide to act responsibly and minimize the negative implications of global business. And that is actually a way of thinking we want to teach to the students too.
You mentioned transformative leadership as one way of overcoming the problems. What exactly is transformative leadership?
Well, it is this kind of looking ahead and making a change. And I think that what is our task is, of course, to support the capability development of these future leaders. We could actually borrow a model or a framework from consumer behavior research, which is called IDA. It's like the opera. And the abbreviation comes from the initials of the phases. So it starts with awareness, then it's interest, desire, and action. And we hope that with this kind of education, and we've seen it actually happening, that the students' feedback tells us that the students have not actually been very much aware of these ethical challenges. and that they have not known, for example, how close modern slavery is to their everyday life. And now also the feedback tells us that this has aroused interests, and that's of course what we want to, and I guess in that way we are on the right track. What we of course would like them to be as transformative leaders is that when they graduate, they have the desire to take action and act accordingly.
Very good. But how is all of this related to foreign policy? There are certainly many connections.
Yes, and I see a lot of connections, of course, with foreign policy and international business. They are tightly intertwined, and I think that Minister Haavisto actually gave us an excellent example in his comments earlier when he spoke about the Arctic Council and how the United States has changed its policy because of the political change. But on the other hand, the Russian side had changed its policy because of economic reasons, because they wanted to protect their economic interests in the area. So this is an excellent example how they are intertwined. And of course, it's not a coincidence that in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, there are two ministers. There is the Minister for Foreign Affairs, and then there is the Minister for Foreign Trade, because these kind of negotiations, whether it's about multilateral agreements between countries or whether it is about trade agreements, all that, is so much intertwined. Of course, it is also perhaps important to highlight at this point the complexity of global business today. So trade policy today is not only about export barriers or tariffs or quotas between countries. And it's not only about competition between industries and countries, but we have to think about that the majority of today's international business, it takes place on new modes of operations. So it's all about global value change. It's all about digital platforms, and all that changes the rules of the game in many ways. Also, the power structures have changed. So there are these non-governmental organizations. There are supranational organizations like United Nations. Minister Haavisto mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals. They do play a role also in international business. So there are a lot of these connection points. So I think that today's foreign policy, trade policy, they are tightly intertwined, but also at the same time, the agenda which is negotiated, it's much more complex and much more broad than it was. Of course, I'm using here the opportunity as well that we are very happy of the fact that because we want to educate these responsible future leaders, that we have been able to also introduce the changes of global business and the basics of trade policy into our curriculum. So we are at the heart of a highly ranked multidisciplinary university. So we are able to offer our students a combination of knowledge on international business, but also on political science and, for example, political history, which of course gives them a much broader perspective than before. And we encourage our international business students to take a minor in political science or political history. And recently we have been able to offer the students a new 25 credits module on trade policy and changes of global business, which has been supported by the TT Foundation. This CAPPAS project, as we call it, it's run at our Pan-European Institute, and the person responsible is Professor Kari Liut.
Wonderful. It's so good to have such a broad curriculum containing all these things, and we're so fortunate to have you there teaching these courses. Now it's time for one question for all of you, but in the meantime, please write something in the chat so that we can use this opportunity to ask our experts. So, is there something that we are missing? There have been very hopeful visions, but is there a hopeful vision for the future that we tend to overlook? What would you say?
Well, if I start, I remember how former President Koivisto had this sentence that things used to settle down in the future, even the biggest crisis. And I have been thinking this very much because when I was young, the threat of the nuclear war and of course the threat of the immediate eco-catastrophe was very dominating in our lives. And I feel the same now with the youth who are thinking about the climate disaster and so forth. And I hope it's not too late that we react to such challenges, but at the same time, I can see quite strong reaction on the political level and actually in our economy as well. If it's a global one, if it's really influencing the big powers, if Brazil with its rainforest will follow rapidly enough and so forth. That's, I think, these kind of challenges we have, but reactions are there and issues that were very much in the margins, like environmental issues and climate issues, are now in the middle of global politics. And this is maybe creating some optimism that we are reacting to these things. Thank you.
Thank you. That was a great opening to this issue. So, Jyrki Kallio, what do you think?
Well, I wish I had an easy answer, and I'm one of those who rather tends to think that my glass is always half empty rather than half full. I'm more than on the pessimist side, and when we think of all the attempts during the past few decades, there have been people saying, you know, this is the end of history, and now the liberal democracy is on the rise, and that's all, you know, that's where everything will be going to, and Europe was coming together nicely, inflation was working smoothly, and so forth. And now we are back, perhaps at the brink of a new Cold War, which certainly I hope not, but there are signs pointing to that direction. Nationalism is on the rise, racism, all kinds of again these borders between the nations that we at some point thought, or at least hoped that, you know, there will become a time when the borders will lose their importance, are more important than ever. Again, nation states are going strong. The efforts to combat climate crisis are not very convincing. And although everybody knows that something should be done, it just seems to be in the human nature to not to do anything. However, the hopeful vision that there still is, I think, comes from the very simple fact that we only have this one planet. And sooner or later we will have to come together and realize this fact and work to keep this planet inhabitable and also make it a more just place for everyone. I don't know what it takes, what kind of an awakening it takes for us, but it gives me some hope. That and some sort of glimpse of a hopeful vision that I don't really see any other way. There has to be a realization of this law coming sooner or later.
Thank you. It's always great to meet a fellow pessimist, because I think that I tend to be something called defensive pessimist, meaning that I'm not necessarily sure that this way that we are using now will work. So I think of plan B, C, D, etc., because there are goals that we have to reach, like the problems that you mentioned. If plan A won't work, then we'll have to take plan B, C, and D. And I think that this kind of pessimism is actually hidden optimism, because we realize that certain problems need to be solved one way or another. Thank you. What about Nina Nummela?
Well, welcome to the world of devoted optimists. So again, with a glass half full, not half empty. I am optimistic, and the main reason for that is the young people I have around me, and also the ones I meet at the university. They are committed, and they really want to make a change. So if I take, for example, the students at the Turku School of Economics, you would perhaps expect that the students who seek education in a business school, that they would be very strongly driven by profits and personal benefits. It's actually the contrary. We monitor these kind of, for example, the top career goals of our students on a regular basis. And for quite a few years already, the top 3 of the career goals are very clear. The first one is to do meaningful work. The second one is to be intellectually challenged. And the third one is to have a sound work and life balance. I don't think we could wish for more.
My experience exactly. I've also enjoyed tremendously the attitude and the mentality of these young people. And there is every reason to be optimistic in that respect. But there is something that I'm very pessimistic about. There are no questions on the chat. Please up your game. I would like to see some questions and comments. But in the meantime, please, what kind of ideas did come up when you listened to one another?
If I may start, I would actually have a question to Pekka, to Minister Haavisto, about values and common and the Cold War that I mentioned. How do you see the place for Finland in a situation where it seems that the values of China on one hand and the so-called West on the other hand are on a collision course? They seem to be incompatible, and it is leading to sort of a new kind of ideological competition that then also has spreads to other areas. Now, where does Finland fit in this? We of course share the Western values, but then again there are interests, and very often interests and values for a foreign policy actor, they might not be one and the same. Now, we might have several interests which call us to cooperate with China on several fields, and many interests which do not coincide necessarily with the interests of the leader of the Western world with the United States. So how does one in a small country foreign policy put together this contradiction between the interests and values, which are more important, or can such a question even be posed? But I know that the media is certainly already asking these questions and wanting to know, what are we going to do with where do we stand and so forth.
Well, thanks, Jyrki. It's a good question, and first I have to say that it was already a couple of years ago when I was visiting China, and I visited in Beijing the local Greenpeace office, and I was in the southern part of China where there was this dispute on Stora Enso investment, and I met with the local activists and others. it was for me an eye-opening issue in that sense that the country that my picture of it was that it was still very very closed on issues like citizen movements and so forth. I could see that rising up, and of course this was a very similar experience that was in the, I would say, last days of Soviet Union, where citizen activism had a new forms and environmental and ecological questions were up and so forth. Since then, I have understood that the space for the civil society has been maybe shrinking and not increasing in the last years, and that's of course pity. I think when asking Finland-China relationship, we can maybe also learn something from Finland-Russia relationship, that it's also includes issues that you have to manage together, like the environmental issues, the climate issues. I'm happy about the Chinese climate goals and so forth. And at the same time, issues where you might disagree, or you disagree issues of democracy and human rights issues and others. And there is not, of course, any rapid solution to that. But at the same time, it's you don't have to give up your own values. Actually, in this debate, you continue the dialogue and you try to reach something. And at the same time, of course, China is linked to the global cyberspace and so forth. It's these issues are probably coming in, and the new thoughts are coming in a more fluent way than in the past when internet and cyberspace didn't exist. You can live in isolation on this globe, but it's very difficult, like we see from North Korea, that it's not an easy alternative either. So maybe my hope is actually this information and floating of the information and citizen contacts and so forth, which anyhow exist there and might change the way of thinking. But maybe again here, I might be too optimistic.
Thank you. Now, Kai Kimppa has come to the rescue in the chat department, and there is a question to Jyrki. Isn't there a tradition of consequentialist ethic also in China, somewhat similar to Bentham's and Mill's utilitarianism, and another similar to Stoicism? If my understanding is correct, that would imply that similar traditions arise in different cultures. Can you make that briefly? In 1 minute, exactly.
No, yes. It's a very good question, and it is right. There are several schools of thought in China different from each other already in early history, and some of them are very close in thought with several schools of thought here that we can find in the Western tradition. So certainly, it seems that similar ideas have been come forth or have been invented in different parts of the world independently from each other, and that's also something that perhaps gives us hope for understanding the idea that we are not that different from each other. Perhaps the difference is not so much in the ideas between Chinese and Western tradition, but it's perhaps a more fundamental way of looking at the world. And just very simply in 15 seconds, in Western philosophy, we use concepts that are usually nouns. They are strict words. They have a clear borderline. This is the concept, and then there's another concept in a different box. In China, it's different. The concepts are verbs or adjectives. They fluctuate and evolve and merge into each other, and so this there is something perhaps. This kind of a fundamental difference, which sometimes makes it very difficult for a Western philosopher to understand the Chinese philosophical thinking, and vice versa. It is not an insurmountable obstacle, but it's something that it's good to realize that there are kind of difficult.
Thank you. I have a tendency to stick to the German punctuality. But I still read 2 questions from the chat. Päivi Oinas asks, how about Finnish firms? Are they any different from other internationally operating firms in terms of ethical action? And the second question, what are your views on Chinese political and economic policies on investing / providing loans in developing countries, e.g. Africa and Asia? Question is to all the panelists. But now I think very brief answers are in order.
I can take Päivi's question. I give a very brief answer. No.
A little
no.
bit.
There are forerunners in terms of ethical issues among Finnish firms, but there are also laggards. So Finnish firms are no different from any other. You know, the nationality does not make any difference.
Maybe we did not want to hear that, but thank you.
No.
What about the views on Chinese political and economic policies? To all.
Well, very briefly, if I start, just one thing that it's important to keep in mind is that China is not a monolith even on this front either. So there are Chinese actors, different types of Chinese actors active in Europe and Africa and elsewhere in the world. Some of them are closely related to the state, some of them are not. Sometimes they might be Chinese businesses that operate actually against the interests of the Chinese state, just thinking of their own short-term profit and so forth. And this is why it is very difficult to sort of give a clear picture of what is China doing, because China is so many different players at the same time. So I'd just say that the jury is very much still out in these questions.
Maybe I'll shortly say about these two things. First, about the Finnish companies. Maybe something which you have done a little bit better in Finland has been the climate issue. We have this Climate Leadership Council established by Finnish companies, and it's really going forward and going rapidly forward. Biggest Finnish companies joining on climate issues and trying to influence their European counterparts as well. So that's what I have been quite pleased about. On China, I met some years ago a Chinese businessman, and I said that you have 20,000 Chinese companies in Africa. So what is the secret of your success? And he asked, what success you mean? And I said, what do you mean by this question? And he said, well, we had 100,000 companies who tried, but luckily 20,000 succeeded. And I asked, so what happened with those who didn't succeed? Well, they didn't know the market, they didn't understand Africa, they didn't know the local conditions, but luckily 20,000 managed to do it. So that's maybe the one of the answers, also answer of magnitude and mass from the Chinese side. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been my long time dream to have this kind of discussion and learn from the experts, and I'm overjoyed by this. I feel inspired and definitely ready to start learning. Thank you, Pekka Haavisto, Jyrki Kallio, Niina Nummela. Thank you, our technical team, Terhikki and Jolita, and thank you, all participants. I wish to see you all after summer holidays on the 6th of September. Then we'll talk about the challenges of global leadership and, of course, solve all of those challenges. But now let us enjoy the summer. Stay healthy and happy. See you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.